Hello, everybody. Welcome to our very special debate special.
Yes.
It's a very creative name that we have come up here.
Extra special. That's why they're
Extra special. The Republican presidential debate is not that far away. We thought we would do a big thing here in our brand new studio. Thank you to our premium subscribers for helping us build it in order to preview not only what we think is going to happen, but kind of prepare you with the strategies, the facts, who's going to be on the stage, what we think is going to play out, and just a good primer for everybody going into it. Just quickly beforehand, if you're joining us, we have a special discount on our yearly membership, 10% off, that you can join anytime between now and the actual debate. That'll be available in the link of the video of this description or available on the podcast player. But Krystal, how do you think that we should think about said debate before we go into it? How should the people out there be preparing themselves?
Yeah, so we've got you covered from all angles. We want to start here with the basics of just literally who is going to be on the stage, who has qualified, who's going to be on the stage for this first debate, which is being hosted by Fox News. Let's go ahead and throw our graphic up on the screen where we can reveal these are the faces of the individuals who qualified. Now, one very important caveat here, former President Trump obviously has said he will not participate in debates, leaving it open that he is unlikely to participate in any of the debates. So the 8 candidates who actually qualified are Trump, DeSantis, Vivek Ramaswamy, Mike Pence, Nikki Haley, Chris Christie, Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, and Doug Burgum. So there were a few extras who sort of like claimed they qualified, but the RNC was like, we don't think you're going to qualify. None of those individuals are going to be on the stage. Let's just go based on the polling, tier by tier, who's going to be up there, because maybe some of you don't know all of these individuals. A few of them we've actually interviewed here, quite interestingly. Right. Let's put up what is considered, based on the polling again, the sort of top tier of contenders. So for this one, we obviously have Governor Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. He is right now, according to the Real Clear Politics average of polls, sitting at 14.6%. Next up, we have Vivek Ramaswamy, who really has been making some moves in the primary. He is a businessman and also an author. He is sitting at 7.1%. And next down the list, we have the former Vice President, Mike Pence, who is at 4.3%. The next level, what we're calling kind of the mid-tier here, again, just based on what their polls are sitting at today at the national level, we have in this tier Nikki Haley. She is the former governor of South Carolina and also served in the Trump administration. She is at 3.3%. Roughly the same place, we have Chris Christie. He is at 3.1%. He, of course, is the former governor of New Jersey and a very outspoken Trump critic who is likely to make things interesting on the stage. And we also have Senator Tim Scott, senator from South Carolina, who a lot of donor and media types have been excited about recently. He is sitting nationally at 3%, although I will say I think he is a little bit higher in the polls in terms of Iowa and New Hampshire in particular. And then rounding out the field and the lowest tier in terms of their national polling, we have Asa Hutchinson, who Trump calls Ada for certain reasons. He is former governor of Arkansas. He's at 0.9%. Doug Burgum, current governor of North Dakota. He is at 0.5%. We did have an opportunity to interview both of these gentlemen, which we appreciated, and Doug Burgum managed to get on the stage using what I guess you would call an innovative strategy of basically like paying people to donate a small amount back to him, but it worked out for him. He's going to be there.
Every $1 you get 20. Yeah, listen, it actually did work out for him. There are a lot of people who did similar schemes that it didn't work out. We got some of those folks. Let's go ahead and put that up there on the screen. Unfortunately, Larry Elder, he currently says he's actually going to be suing the RNC because he claims that he did debate.
Oh, really?
Businessman Perry Johnson, despite throwing as much money as he possibly could at Newsmax to try and qualify, even though he did reach the 40,000 qualified donors, he didn't appear to reach the polling metrics. Will Hurd, the former congressman from Texas, and mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez. All four, actually save for Hurd, had claimed at least in some way that they had qualified for the debate. But that's why we didn't really find out until we got the official results from the RNC. The big question now is, now that you know who these individuals are, is does this debate matter? And we thought we would approach it from two angles. From one universe where it does. In this universe where it does, why does it matter? And one interesting new poll that came out of Iowa and New Hampshire, and we've talked about this a lot, Krystal, here on the show, that the early states matter disproportionately here because the only way that a Vivek Ramaswamy, a Ron DeSantis, a Chris Christie, a Tim Scott is able to break out is they have to win Iowa or show a very good showing, and they have to win New Hampshire. Those two, that gives us a ton of media momentum heading into Nevada and then into South Carolina, into Super Tuesday, and then the Florida primary. So in that lane, Steve Kornacki over at MSNBC who does a fantastic job, actually pointed something out that we want to show all of you. Let's go ahead and put this up there. He shows that, quote, stipulating Trump is the favorite to win the GOP nomination, there does seem to be a potential path for some of his rivals. Start with our new Iowa poll. Trump is up by 23 points, but DeSantis actually has the highest favorability rating, and Scott has the highest favorability to unfavorability rating. Broad goodwill gives DeSantis and Scott the opportunity to grow their support. It's a big if, but if one could consolidate non-Trump support, they would have a chance at winning the state. Of course, Trump lost Iowa in 16. He bounced back in New Hampshire. He was fine, but there's potential differences here. In 16, Iowa was a three-way race with Cruz and Trump and Rubio. What if in 24 there's a clear separation between the top two and all of the others? So I think that is the scenario that we have to look at this. That's the scenario where this debate matters. It's who's the alternative? Who is the number one alternative? Nobody else matters. And that is why Chris Christie, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, and Vivek Ramaswamy, it's going to be a battle royale between those three. They need to be the alternative to Trump. And I think for several reasons, I don't think Christie can do that because he doesn't have Trump appeal. I think DeSantis and Ramaswamy are really the only two who could. Tim Scott is a dark horse. I just don't think he's really a fighter whenever it comes to the debates. We'll get to some of that in the winners and the losers.
Yeah, and there was an op-ed in the New York Times, interestingly, from New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu, who was also making a similar case of, listen, if you really want to defeat Trump, all of y'all, except for one person, are going to have to drop out, and everybody's going to have to consolidate behind one candidate. It's the same thing they said ultimately in 2016, you know, in the last-ditch phase to try to come up with some candidate other than Trump. It was the same idea then. Now, Democrats did actually execute this strategy very successfully in 2020 in order to, you know, everybody dropped out and coalesced behind the former vice president, Joe Biden, and that did work to overcome the momentum that Bernie Sanders had at that time and what looked to be, you know, an inevitability coming out of Nevada. So at least on the Democratic side, we have seen this strategy work. Listen, do I think that this is likely to happen? No. But I do think it's important to hold open the possibility that we don't know what's going to happen with Trump. He's in all kinds of legal trouble. He's a very unpredictable character to begin with. So you just can't predict the future. And so all of these guys are basically angling to be the number one alternative to Trump. Ron DeSantis had his memo posted online by his super PAC of his debate strategy. We talked about this some in the show. It's very revealing because he takes a very cautious approach to going after Trump. But he reveals, his super PAC reveals, that he needs to take a, quote, hammer to Vivek Ramaswamy because he sees him as his primary rival to be that top Trump alternative. I expect there'll be a lot of fireworks there because not only are they both fighting to position themselves as like the top alternative to Trump, they have some ideological disputes as well, in particular on foreign policy. Vivek has been unafraid also of accusing Ron DeSantis of basically being a super PAC puppet, so that could get interesting. Chris Christie is very politically talented. He's not going to be the nominee. He doesn't have himself ideologically positioned where the Republican base would want him to be, but he also will mix things up, is unafraid. You famously remember he like sort of ended Marco Rubio, torpedoed him on behalf of Trump back in 2016. So he has the chops to be able to create those sorts of moments. So that creates some intrigue and drama here as well. But you know, from a substantive perspective, what I'm looking to see is there are some divides that have actually emerged between these candidates in terms of policy. I think foreign policy is the most obvious example, but also in terms of the, you know, really traditional Reagan conservative type economic policy and people who are at least flirting with a more populist economics. And I'd love to see some of that drawn out in these debates.
Listen, I would love that too. I have no illusions, especially whenever we're talking about Fox News. Fox News, in my experience, has some of the worst questions whenever it comes to debates. And the reason is simple. They're focused on horse race stuff, which I think is dumb at a presidential debate because it's like, you're already here. They're like, you're doing low in the polls. What's your plan? I think it's fine when you're sitting down for an interview, but at a debate with such limited amount of time, you have to get to the issues. So here are some things that I need to see or would love to see. Ukraine. I want a huge debate on Ukraine because Chris Christie has basically called DeSantis the Trump and Vivek position as quote-unquote Neville Chamberlain. We need to have a serious clash of wills there between Chris Christie, Nikki Haley, and Tim Scott, who are on the establishment side, and then the more restrictionist side, DeSantis somewhere in the middle, specifically with Vivek Ramaswamy, and let them go at it. We also need to see entitlements. We should note, I asked Ramaswamy about entitlements. He got a little bit squirrely. Ron DeSantis has really never addressed his position on the future of entitlements and Social Security. I want to see that debate. Tim Scott, Asa Hutchinson, Doug Burgum, we talked with all of them. They're definitely on the side of cutting. Okay, great. I also want to see Obamacare. I know nobody cares about this, but healthcare is always a huge part of the debate. Do we still sign on the 2015 plan, the 2020 vote the 2017 vote on Obamacare, which some of the senators on the stage voted for or supported while they were in the Trump administration? Do we still support the repeal and replace plan that came in that place? So I know these are nerdy questions, but I think they still are going to matter in terms of the record. And then also, we're going to expect, and there's no way that this won't happen, endless numbers of questions about Trump in the legal questions.
Yeah.
And so from a political perspective, who can come out, and this is the most advantageous, who will come out as the best defender of Trump? Who will be the best indicter of the FBI and the DOJ and Biden? I don't think Biden, I don't want to hear routine questions about disagreements with Biden. Obviously, they disagree with Biden. They're running against him. It has to be about disagreements between themselves. But I don't expect Fox to do any of this because they almost always do softballs. They never do a particularly good job of actually distinguishing the real areas that these gentlemen do disagree on substantive policy. It's going to be horse race, Trump, and then Biden. Stupid questions. I hope, though.
I think you could see some Ukraine questions because there's been enough tension between the candidates to make that like conflict interesting from a Fox News ratings perspective. And you also had Nikki Haley this week taking shots at Vivek Ramaswamy over aid to Israel. So that's another area where you could imagine, just out of the sheer nature of loving to see conflict, perhaps they go in that direction as well. But you're absolutely right that, first of all, I want to make sure to say really clearly, it's a disgrace that Trump is not coming to this debate. Like, it is fully contemptful of the American people. It's fully contemptful of the Republican base. It is taking their vote for granted. I think it's disgusting that he's not going to be there and participate. I think it's disgusting that Joe Biden has no intention of debating his opponents. And I don't want to let that go without that being said. Trump is obviously going to be the big elephant in the room. And you have a range of approaches among these candidates in terms of how they actually deal with Trump. Doug Burgum is willing to be a little bit critical of him. Asa Hutchinson is willing to be significantly critical of him. And then Chris Christie obviously is willing to go all the way in and be extremely critical of Trump. And then the people who, frankly, have a more serious chance of being his top alternative are more or less sycophants who have variously done everything they can to possibly defend him. And I understand it from a political perspective, even though I think it lacks moral courage, because listen, it's not an accident that the top alternatives, Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy, and with Vivek being the person who's rising the fastest in the polls right now, have been variously committed to defending Trump against the core accusations against him. So seeing how they handle all of that, how much of the questioning focuses on Donald Trump, how much he just hangs over this whole thing is going to be another piece to watch for coming out of this.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, look, I agree. I think Trump should show up. I don't think he should just take people for granted. But let's be honest. We've all looked at the polls here. People trust Trump more than they literally trust their religious leaders. We just did a hilarious segment on that on our Monday show. It's like Republican voters trust Trump more than their friends and family and then their pastors / God.
Yeah.
So in that, he can afford to. He said it himself. I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people would still vote for me. I think he's right.
Let me make the case though that I basically agree that it's probably the right strategy. As much as I hate it and think it's disgusting, it's probably the right strategy. But I will say that it does put Trump in the position of doing something very uncharacteristic, which is giving someone else the opportunity to grab the spotlight. We're going to talk about Trump is doing this Tucker Carlson interview on Twitter. Listen, that's just not going to get as many eyeballs as a primetime major party debate. It's just not. And we've heard from Trump a million times. Like, he's not going to can't say anything all that new that's going to be all that different from what he said before. So many more people are going to be interested in the inherent show and conflict that is a major party primary debate. So he does create an opening for someone else to grab the spotlight, make a name for themselves, dominate the news cycle, etc. And Politico put together a piece trying to argue the case that debates actually do matter, and they actually have shifted races significantly. And in fact, primary races, the debates are what have primarily moved the numbers in terms of Democrat and Republican primary races. So let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from Politico. They say why Trump might regret passing on the first debate. They say as presidential primaries have become more national in scope, debates have arguably been all that has really mattered in the run-up to the early states. Candidates like Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, Ben Carson, and Pete Buttigieg surged in the polls after strong showings, and Fred Thompson, Rick Perry, and Beto O'Rourke stand as cautionary tales of hyped-up candidates who bombed on stage and saw their campaigns crumble months before voting even began. And one example we can give from the 2020 Democratic primaries was in that first debate, Kamala had her little package, like that little girl was me line that she trained at the former vice president, now current president. And it actually really worked. It really landed. She jumped up in the polls for a brief moment in time. She actually surged to second place in the polls. But the major caveat to all of this is the people that they mention here as prime examples of, individuals who the debates have really helped them. Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, Ben Carson, Pete Buttigieg. It's not like any of them actually won the primary.
None of them won.
It ended up being a bit of a flash in the pan. I mean, you could argue for Pete, it ended up being a bit more than a flash in the pan because he goes on to, pretend to win Iowa and do well in New Hampshire, and now he's in the cabinet position. Like, I could see something like that for Vivek in particular. But will they actually change the landscape enough to supplant Trump? No. They may really shape who ends up being the primary alternative. That's probably about the most you could say for it.
The most I will say for it is I believe that this is a fight for number 2. And so I think the stakes are very high for the plausible alternatives. I think the rest of them are basically just wasting their time up there. But, good luck to you. I wish you the best. And I do think it matters only insofar as being the alternative and then how that will shape the future of the Republican Party. Will Trump take a hit for this? I just don't think so. I think that he strategically made the right call, even though democratically I think he should have showed up. He had nothing to lose except for taking heat from Chris Christie and from these other folks. And he's like, well, whenever you're on top, he's like, let everybody just squabble. He even put out a truth not that long ago. He's like, I will decide from this who will be my vice president, which is the ultimate power move.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.